Good morning, everyone. It's quite special to be here today. I've been here, or it's my first time at code.talks, and I've been yesterday participating in some of the talks. And I must say, on the one hand, I was very much blown away. On the other hand, I also have to admit I didn't understand everything that was spoken about. And but I do hope that you find this talk today insightful, given the fact that I want to take a more conceptual view at a problem that we can solve with the help of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, I want to talk about one of the biggest challenges of our lifetime, which is climate change. And I want to talk about how AI and machine learning can actually make a difference, and hence how we as a community can make a difference in tackling this issue. And I want to do that by particularly focusing on carbon markets. Now, can you give me a quick show of hands, who of you know about carbon markets? Some hands are going up, a bit hesitant. Okay, 60-40, 40-60, 50-50, somewhere around that. So I will make sure that I cover a bit of it, and I hope the level of detail is sufficient. Otherwise, come to me afterwards or ask questions. Now, a couple of points about myself. I'm Tobias Straube. I'm a partner for analysis at Cambrian Futures, which is an AI product and strategy lab in Berkeley, California. I'm also a co-founder of CEO Network, which is an advisory company with offices in Kenya and Germany. And I'm a board member of Digital Waves in Switzerland, which is an investment service provider. So it's quite a bit. And I've provided you this list because it shows a dilemma. Traveling and hence emitting carbon is very much a central part of my professional life, unfortunately. And on the other hand, I can't and don't want to change it. Yet climate change is something that I've really recognized as something that is really important for me. And it's at the top of my mind in the work that we are doing, in particular at Cambrian. Now, let me give you an idea of what we actually do at Cambrian. We develop product and solution designs, for example, for data marketplaces. And if you think of it, data is something that is extremely hard to price and extremely hard to trade. And hence, there are a lot of lessons learned for carbon markets and vice versa. So this is where I'm taking some of the things I'm talking about. I haven't developed those ideas that I'm going to present today, not alone. It's my good friend, David Perwan. He couldn't be here today. He's currently fundraising in the US, but I still wanted to give him a shout out. And Lasse, who is the head of data at Climametrics in Berlin, who also couldn't be here today, but he's a close collaborator. Now, this is the problem why I'm here. Carbon emissions have only seen one way, and this is up, up, up. We had some dents during times of crisis, but generally speaking, it's been only going up. And this is a problem. Whether or not we believe that the Earth shouldn't warm up more than 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, we have to bring carbon emissions down. Every 0.1 degree matters. Every day matters. We are not taking action. Their aim must be to achieve net zero. Net zero means that we are removing as much carbon from the air as we are putting into the atmosphere. Now, in extremely simple terms, how do we achieve that? There are 4 steps. First, we have to measure. I think we can all appreciate here, if we don't have a data-driven baseline, then it's very difficult to take action. So we need to measure to see how much are we emitting, not only in our organizations, but in the entire supply chain. Experts talk about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. Once we know how much we are emitting, we need to reduce. That's the first order of business. We need to reduce energy consumption as much as we can. Those energy consumptions that we cannot reduce, we need to switch to renewable energies. And that often means electrifying first and then going to a no carbon or low carbon energy source. And only the emissions that we cannot reduce and that we cannot switch to renewables, those are the emissions that we need to offset. So it is the measure of last resort, and yet it is an important one. And when we talk about carbon markets, we talk about the last step. We talk about offsetting. That doesn't mean that reduction and switching is less important. It's just that carbon markets play a role in this field. And offsetting is extremely important. Almost 50% of the 2,000 largest companies in the world have committed to net zero. And 66% of them say that offsetting is a key or central element or component to their net zero strategy. So how does offsetting work? You have a company, let's say a company here in Hamburg, that is emitting. And then somewhere else in the world, there's a carbon project that is removing or avoiding the same amount of carbon. The company here in Germany or in Hamburg pays for the project somewhere else in the world to remove or avoid exactly the same amount of carbon they are putting into the air. And this is carbon credits. Usually 1 carbon credit is 1 ton of carbon emissions. Carbon markets go back to the 1990s, the Kyoto Protocol. More recently, however, they found a legal framework in the Paris Agreement, in particular Article 6, which kind of provides the basis. It's in extremely vague terms, very boring to read, but it provides the basis that we can actually trade carbon emissions, not only within a country, but across countries, which is important because it's an important mechanism to not only offset emissions, but also to have a financial flow, oftentimes to countries in the global south, in all this cycluses, so that countries in the global south actually get also money in order to make their countries more climate resilient or adapt accordingly. Now, when we talk about carbon markets, we have to talk about 2 different kinds. There are compliance markets, which are the biggest ones. In Europe, it's called ETS, European Trade System, which means a regulator or public authority obliges a specific sector of companies to not emit more than a certain threshold. If they go above, they need to offset those emissions by buying credits, while companies that go below the thresholds can issue credits up to this threshold. In doing so, we set an economic incentive for reducing carbon emissions. The other carbon market are the voluntary carbon markets, much smaller, but extremely relevant. They allow organizations or individuals to offset their carbon voluntarily. It is not regulated, and as people are still using it, companies are still using it in order to reach the net zero targets, the 66% that I've shown you before. And I want to talk about voluntary carbon markets because they're extremely interesting. They've been growing extremely exponential. 30% is the compounded annual growth rate, and you can see here to the left, this is not going to stop anytime soon. It is an exponentially growing market. Some people expect that it will grow from 2 billion to 5 or 180 billion even in the next 7 years. So it's an attractive market to be. And this is also because less than 1% of all emissions are currently covered by voluntary carbon markets. That shows you kind of the total addressable market, as we would say as an entrepreneur. And while all of this looks extremely promising, carbon markets get really bad headlines. And I just want to exemplify that with this short clip.
Look, on some level, you probably know carbon offsets are bullshit, both because you're a reasonably intelligent person and because you know exactly what show you are watching right now. I don't open my beak to squawk out good news. This thing pops open for sad news and porridge, and I'm all out of porridge right now.
I think we can all agree that John Oliver is not exactly a carbon expert or a scientist, but he's got an important point. There are a lot of issues with carbon markets, in particular voluntary carbon markets. There's a lot of research that is showing that carbon credits are actually not offsetting or avoiding the amount of emissions that they are claiming to massive extents. There's also scientific research that shows that especially when we talk about nature-based carbon credits, and I come to that in a second, are not as effective as we thought it before. And then there's the issue that we are planting trees somewhere in the world, and we tell people that, or we are claiming that they will take out carbon of the atmosphere over the next 10 years, but then there's a wildfire and they burn down after 3 years. So a lot of shortcomings. Why is that? Let me give you an example. If I were to fly from Hamburg to San Francisco in economy class, I would emit 1.3 tons of carbon. Now that's 60% of my annual carbon budget. We cannot emit more than 2 tons of carbon every year as humans on this globe if we want to stop the Earth heating up for more than 2 degrees. So we have an extremely small annual carbon budget. And this one flight is consuming already 60%. Now, if I want to go to this airline and set it off, you know, there's this box for setting off my carbon credits, my carbon emissions. It costs 21 euros and 24 cents. So could it be that we can actually offset, given the fact that the flight ticket is 900 euros, that we only pay a premium of 2.3% and live a net zero life? And this is not true. It is not true because carbon credits are not just, or carbon credits are not always the same. In order to understand why sometimes it's so cheap and why we have so many criticisms and so many shortcomings, we first need to understand that there are different types of carbon credits. There are nature-based carbon credits, for example. This is when people go somewhere and plant a forest because trees are taking carbon out of the air. That's a nature-based carbon credit, or if we do seagrass projects, for example. There are technology-based carbon credits. And those are when we build solar parks or wind farms, or when we actually capture carbon before it leaves our manufacturing facilities. Right? There are carbon capture systems that are out there, and those are technology-based. Then there are some carbon credits that are avoidance-oriented. They're actually not actively removing carbon from the air, but they are avoiding further carbon emissions. For example, if we replace a coal power plant with a solar wind park, then we are avoiding. We're not actually taking or removing carbon effectively out of the air. And then we have exactly those removal schemes, right? Whether or not it's technology-based, we have it in Iceland, for example, where there's a machine that takes out carbon off the air, or planting trees, which also effectively remove, at least until they're burned, as long as they don't burn down. So when we talk about carbon credits, and this is where lots of the problems come from, is oftentimes we talk about carbon credits that are somewhat avoidance-oriented and that are nature-based, so less effective. Because if we would actually actively remove carbon, then we would probably need more technology solutions, and hence that's a bit more expensive. And we are not buying that. But the shortcomings fall into 3 bigger pictures, or into 3 bigger pillars. First of all, there's an intransparency in the marketplace for voluntary carbon credits. It's very difficult to match buyer and seller. We also have little transparency in the quality of carbon credits that we are buying and in the price signals. We lack, and as a result, we have reputational risks for organizations. We are now seeing companies, Apple, for example, just released that statement, right, at the last conference when they introduced the new iPhone, that they are now going for high-quality carbon credits. That means they have an internal team in order to ensure that it's actually a high-quality carbon credit. So that takes an additional effort. And there's very low market sophistication, right? It's 2 billion, but we are lacking places for secondary markets. We are lacking places for registries, for example, like we know it from the normal financial world. There are quality and integrity issues. As I've said, right, the race to the bottom leads to poor quality carbon credits. And we have some very old verification methods. Who can tell me how many trees are out in the forest, right? Are they still existing? Can they still actually take carbon out of the atmosphere? There are still people walking around, you know, counting trees, and that really needs upgrading. And then there are some political and regulatory issues. I don't want to go too deep into that, but there are quite a few discussions of what the future of carbon markets is. There's for sure they're going to exist, continue to exist, but they don't know in what form and if the regulator will step in at some point. So, and despite all those issues and despite all those shortcomings, The IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change, stated in 2021 that carbon offsetting and hence carbon removal is absolutely crucial if we still want to reach net zero. So what do we do out of this? On the one hand, we have an exponential market that is growing, right? That is providing a lot of potential. And on the other hand, we have a lot of significant shortcomings, challenges. And this is, I think, where people like us here in the room come into the picture. Because for me, if I hear an exponentially growing market on the one hand and challenges on the other, it is very much an opportunity for innovations. And it's an opportunity for innovations, especially that can be tackled with technology and that can be tackled with AI, machine learning approaches. And I said I want to give you a quick conceptual overview of some of the spaces in which we can make a difference. There's the space of measuring emissions. There's a space of getting better platforms for pricing and trading carbon credits. We can do a lot of things about improving the quality and performance of carbon credits, monitoring and verifying carbon credits, and in the end, having better risk models and insurance systems. Now, let me take you through them one by one in a bit more granular detail. So when we talk about measuring and accounting carbon emission, that means that before we actually know how much we need to offset, we need to know how much we are actually emitting across our entire supply chains. And that requires analyzing a lot of data from a lot of distributed data sources. And that's a problem that we can tackle using machine learning. And fortunately, there are first innovators. My friend Lasse, for example, with this company in Berlin, they are building accounting software, carbon accounting software using machine learning. Or here, the latest research from IBM, they're using large language models in order to estimate the emissions in entire supply chains. They do that by actually feeding their large language models with the financial transaction data of the companies, because financial transactions tell you quite a bit about the activities a company is doing in an entire supply chain. And that allows you to actually get some insights into the carbon emissions that are linked to those activities. Price transparency and trading of carbon credits. As I've said, currently, it is very difficult to go to a marketplace and actually select the different quality points of carbon credits. But Amazon has managed that for a lot of different goods. And when we talk about price signals, Airbnb has managed to come up with a pricing recommendation engine that allows them to actually put a price point despite no house is like the other. So we've got already recommendation systems and we've got already pricing engines. They are nothing new, but they can be applied to carbon markets in order to help us to get more transparency and a better platform to actually trade and buy carbon credits. There are first innovators in this space as well. Vitrios, for example, or Watershed are some of them. They do fantastic work. And yet, and I think this is so important to underline every single time, we're still at the very infancies. Now, we've talked about the fact that some carbon credits are not having the right quality, right? They're not taking as much carbon out of the air as they're supposed to do, or as much they're claiming. So we can actually model better approaches. We can model carbon credit projects before we are building them in order to ensure that they are effective. And we can find new approaches. The world isn't big enough to grow enough forest to bring us down to net zero. We have a space problem. So nature-based solution cannot be the answer, at least not in the traditional way. But here again, AI and machine learning approaches are there to help, and we see them out there. There is this company, Climate X, for example. They are not yet focusing on carbon credit projects, but they are focusing, for example, on giving you a global climate risk assessment of places. Oftentimes, it's more for real estate. But it just requires a bit of tweaking to get it actually set up for carbon credit projects. Or 2019, Dutna, the co-inventor of CRISPR, won the Nobel Prize. And she is now using genomics in order to build or grow trees and crops that are taking more carbon out of the atmosphere than traditionally crops or trees are doing. So fantastic innovations, and again, we're just at the beginning of it, right? And this is so important to keep in mind. Monitoring and verifying. I said there are a couple of companies or standardization organizations that still send people into the forest or to the nature-based projects in order to count trees. But we know already that we have sufficient satellite imagery, that we have IoT devices that we can use in order to automatically count the trees in the forest and count how much carbon they're actually removing or avoiding. Again, they are first innovators. C-Trees is an offspin from NASA, or Earthbank is doing exactly that. Very exciting projects. And then there's the risk management, right? What is happening, or what are we doing when a forest burns down after 3 years, although we are claiming that they're standing there for at least 10 years in order to take out or remove the carbon from the air as they are claiming. And again, there are insurances that are now popping up that correlate weather data, topography, and socioeconomic data in order to assess the likelihood, for example, of a wildfire. There's also IoT devices that actually predict when wildfires could be happening so that you can stop them before happening or as soon as possible. Now, we've talked about the potential of carbon markets. We talked about the shortcomings, and we can see that first innovators are going into the space. But I still would like to kind of connect that to a call for action, because we are at the infancies and we are far away from having solved the issue. And it requires talent, like the talent here at the conference, to bring carbon markets further. And while this is extremely high level, I just wanted to give you 6 ideas of what could be done. Very simple, very high level, but those products that we have seen, those innovations that we've seen, they are at the beginning, they're at the infancies, they need more talent, they need more brain power in order to improve the products and to scale them. But there are still niches in the market. You could also start your own venture. You could also start your own solutions, your new solutions that address niches in the market that have not been tackled yet. For example, secondary markets for carbon credits or fraud detection in trading carbon credits. Those are things where me and my friends, we have looked into it. We couldn't find anyone who's doing that. You could also take the example of voluntary carbon credits markets and apply it to other things. For example, plastic. Imagine we would have a marketplace where a company that is producing 1 ton of carbon or consuming 1 ton of carbon buys a credit from a project that is taking 1 ton of carbon out of the ocean. We could also have the same for other greenhouse gases or biodiversity projects. So we are just at the beginning. Carbon is the biggest issue, but it's not the only one. We can tackle associated problems. Currently, building carbon credit projects is extremely expensive. So we need to think about new fundraising mechanisms. We need to think about new accelerator programs, not for startups, but for carbon credit projects. We can collaborate and engage on the GitHub community. There's a lot of open space platforms that are looking into it, or engage with the blockchain community. There's a lot of blockchain projects that are actually active in verifying carbon credits and making carbon credits tradable, or verifying price signals. And last but not least, there's always the opportunity to go back to the organizations in which we're working and advocate for a net zero strategy, because in the end of the day, that's the starting place. And if all of this is not enough, I do invite you to connect with me and have a conversation about this or other opportunities, either here, now, or later online, or over a beer if you want to. Thank you so much.